Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My wife and I tried to have a baby for 3 years, until I found out that my sister was pregnant with his child and wanted us to adopt him as if nothing had happened. Hello, Reddit community. The last few years of my life have been a real roller coaster, and I thought it would be worth sharing it with you. My husband Daniel, 34M, and I, Carolina, 31F, have been married for about 5 years. In the beginning, everything was going wonderfully. We had good jobs, a cozy little apartment, and exciting plans for our future. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, but life always finds ways to surprise us when we least expect it. For the last 3 years, we have been trying to start a family, but without success. At first, we kept calm. We thought it was just a matter of time. Everyone always says the same thing. Don't worry, relax, and it will happen when it has to happen. So we followed that advice to the letter. We stopped monitoring menstrual cycles. We took a short vacation to disconnect. We tried to keep our relationship carefree and fun, but as the months went by without seeing that long-awaited positive pregnancy test, a disturbing worry began to take hold in our lives. Eventually, we decided to consult a specialist. They performed all the standard tests, and the results showed no abnormalities. There was no apparent medical reason why we were not conceiving. That was even more frustrating than if they had found a specific problem, because it meant we didn't have clear answers. The doctors simply labeled it as unexplained infertility and suggested we continue trying naturally for a while longer. So we tried again, and every month I was deeply hopeful, only to end up completely devastated when my period came. The situation began to affect me deeply emotionally. I became totally obsessed. Every sensation in my body aroused my hopes. Could this be it? I constantly monitored my body temperature, did ovulation tests, and checked fertility forums like a detective looking for clues. It became the absolute center of my life. Meanwhile, it wasn't just me who was feeling the pressure. Daniel, who had always been extremely patient and understanding, was also starting to show clear signs of stress. It pained him to see me so affected every month, and although he never said so directly, I could tell that he too was feeling the weight of the whole situation. Our intimacy began to feel mechanical, like an obligation, which only made things worse. After a year of failed attempts, we decided to take the next step, in vitro fertilization. We convinced ourselves that science was on our side, that this would finally work. I had heard countless stories of couples who struggled for years, only to get pregnant with IVF on their first try. I became completely convinced that this was the ultimate solution, but it wasn't. The first round of IVF was physically and emotionally exhausting. The constant injections, the hormonal changes, the endless doctor's appointments, it was all incredibly difficult. My body was swollen and unrecognizable. My emotions fluctuated uncontrollably, and I felt like I was trapped on an emotional roller coaster that I couldn't get off. And after all that effort, the embryo transfer failed. It was completely devastating. I felt like my own body had betrayed me. Daniel tried to stay strong for me, but I could also see the deep sadness reflected in his eyes. We didn't know which direction to take. Should we try again? Should we take a break? Should we just accept that maybe we weren't meant to be parents? After a few months of processing the failure, we decided to give it one more try. We scraped together the necessary money, went through all the treatments again, and crossed our fingers in hope. This time, I promised myself not to get my hopes up too much, but of course I did. And once again, the transfer was unsuccessful. At that moment, I fell into such a low emotional state that I didn't even know it was possible to feel that way. I felt completely empty inside, as if all the joy had been drained from my being. I began to avoid social gatherings and to dodge well-meaning relatives who would inevitably ask, "When are you two going to have children?" The situation was also affecting our marriage in ways I hadn't fully understood. Daniel and I began to argue more frequently. They weren't big confrontations, but small tensions that built up over time. He hated seeing me so deeply sad, and I felt a certain resentment because he didn't seem to be as emotionally shattered as I was. In reality, he was also suffering intensely. He just processed it differently. We tried couples therapy, which helped to some extent, but we were still in a strange emotional limbo. We weren't sure what our next step should be. Should we try another round of IVF? Consider adoption as an alternative? or just take a break from the whole process. About 6 months ago, things started to get strange. Looking back now, I don't understand how I didn't notice the changes before. Maybe I just didn't want to see them. Perhaps I was so immersed in my own stress and disappointment that I ignored the obvious signs. Daniel had started to behave differently, not openly suspicious at first, but enough for me to feel that something wasn't right. He started coming home later and later, always with some work-related excuse. Unexpected meetings, tight deadlines, last-minute projects, things that seemed reasonable at the time. But then our intimate life came to a complete standstill. Now, this might not seem like a big problem for most couples who have been together for several years, but considering that we had been desperately trying to have a baby for 3 years, it was extremely unusual. It wasn't just that we weren't having sex. It was that he didn't even seem to show any interest. Before, even when we were under a lot of pressure, we at least tried. We had schedules, doctor-recommended windows where we needed to be together, and although sometimes it felt more like an obligation than anything pleasurable, we did it because we wanted to start a family. But suddenly, nothing. If I took the initiative, he would pull away or say he was too tired. And after a while, I stopped trying because the constant rejection began to hurt me deeply. I convinced myself that he was simply exhausted. Work had been particularly stressful for him, and after everything we had been through, maybe he was emotionally drained. I understood that completely. I too felt completely drained. Even so, I tried to bring up the subject with him. I asked him if something was wrong, if he felt well, if we needed to take a break from all the family planning to focus solely on each other. But he was unresponsive. He kept insisting that everything was fine, that I was overanalyzing the situation. And then, completely out of the blue, my sister Sophia, 27F, turned up at my door and announced that she was pregnant. I was absolutely stunned. But I congratulated her sincerely because, well, that's what you do, right? Despite dealing with my own fertility difficulties, I wasn't going to make her moment revolve around my problems. But before I could even fully process the news, she said something that left me completely baffled. She confessed that she didn't want to have the baby. She explained that it had been the result of a chance encounter, that the father wasn't part of her life, and that she didn't feel ready for motherhood. And then she added something even more shocking. She was willing to give me the baby, simple as that. I remember staring at her, my mind struggling to take in what she was proposing. I had spent years trying and failing to conceive, and now here she was, offering me a baby as if it were a simple favor between sisters. I couldn't find the words. It was too overwhelming, too unexpected. I explained that I needed time to think about it, that I had to consult with Daniel. She understood, but also made it clear that she needed an answer soon. That night, when Daniel finally came home, I told him about the whole situation. I expected him to be as surprised as I was. I mean, I was still processing it, but his reaction was strangely intense. He didn't just express surprise. He immediately objected. He didn't even take a second to consider it. He categorically rejected it, saying, "This is not what I want." I was completely stunned. I didn't expect him to immediately accept with enthusiasm, but at least I thought we could talk about it. This was a possible opportunity to finally have the baby we had been wanting for years. It certainly wasn't how we had originally planned it, but life rarely follows our plans to the letter. But he didn't even want to consider the possibility. He was inflexible, almost dismissive. And when I insisted on talking about the subject, he became defensive. He repeated phrases like, "I just don't want to do this, and this is not the right way." The more he avoided the conversation, the more I began to suspect that something else was going on. Over the next month, I continued to try to talk to him about it, but each conversation ended in mutual frustration. He would either shut down completely or become visibly irritated. It was as if he didn't even want to acknowledge that this was a real option for us. Meanwhile, Sophia was constantly calling me, asking if I had made a decision. I didn't know what to say to her. I felt trapped between my intense desire to be a mother and my husband's outright refusal. As time went by, I began to feel that I didn't even really know Daniel anymore. His whole attitude had changed in ways I couldn't understand. It wasn't just about Sophia's proposal. It was everything in general. He was distant, reserved, and emotionally cold. He barely spoke to me when he was at home. And when he did, it was with short, sharp answers. The warmth we used to share had completely disappeared. I started to question absolutely everything. Then one day I received a text message from my friend that changed everything for good. She informed me that she had seen Daniel and Sophia together in a cafe. They were not sitting like two people having a normal conversation. According to her, they looked too close, with an obvious complicity. She had taken a photograph and sent it to me immediately. My hands trembled uncontrollably when I opened the message. The image showed Daniel and Sophia sitting at a small table in a secluded corner of the cafe. He had his hand on hers, and they were leaning in close to each other as if they were sharing some intimate moment. It wasn't completely explicit, they weren't kissing or anything like that, but it was enough to make my stomach contract painfully. Enough to make me feel physically sick. At first, I refused to believe it. I examined the image for what seemed like an eternity, trying desperately to convince myself that it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they had met by chance. Maybe Sophia had approached him to talk to him about the baby, and this was simply an innocent conversation that happened to look compromising. But in the bottom of my heart, I knew. I had suspected for a while that something wasn't right. This simply confirmed my worst fears. That night, when Daniel came home, I confronted him directly. I picked up my phone, showed him the picture, and asked him point blank what the hell was going on. And you know what? He didn't even try to deny it. He just stood there looking at me with a guilty expression and said, "I'm so sorry." I felt as if the ground had completely disappeared from under my feet. I demanded that he tell me the whole truth. I needed to hear him admit what I already knew in my heart. And he did. He confessed everything to me. He and Sophia had been having a relationship behind my back, and the baby was his. I can't even put into words what I felt at that moment. Overwhelming anger, total disbelief, pain so deep I could barely breathe. It wasn't just my husband who had betrayed me. It was my own sister. The person who was supposed to support me unconditionally. The person who had been by my side through years of anguish as I struggled to conceive. And all this time she had been involved with my husband, carrying his child in her womb. I completely lost control of my emotions. I screamed. I cried my heart out. I threw whatever was closest to me. I don't even remember half of what I said at that moment, but I know that I ordered him to leave immediately. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. He tried to apologize. He tried to explain himself, but none of that mattered to me at all. There was no explanation that could justify such a betrayal. I threw him out of the house that same night. After he left, I simply collapsed on the floor, staring at the wall, completely emotionally numb. It felt like my whole life had crumbled in an instant. The next few days were a confusing blur. Daniel kept calling me insistently, sending messages begging me to talk to him. He told me he loved me deeply, that he had made a terrible mistake, that he had only done it because he couldn't handle the pressure. He argued that he had felt like a complete failure after all our difficulties with infertility. And Sophia had been there consoling him, and one thing had led to another, as if that could somehow explain or justify what they had done. I completely ignored every message. I didn't know what to say to Sophia either. She hadn't tried to contact me after I discovered the truth, and honestly, I didn't know if I could ever face her again. My own sister, the person who was supposed to be my closest family, who was supposed to support me unconditionally, had done this to me. I couldn't understand it at all. I had spent years crying over negative pregnancy tests, wondering why I couldn't conceive. And all that time, my own sister had been secretly involved with my husband, and now she was expecting his child. I felt completely humiliated, like a complete fool, as if everyone around me had known something that I didn't. I constantly replayed every moment in my head, wondering how long this had been going on. Had it started when she first told me she was pregnant, or even before? Had they been laughing behind my back all this time? I barely ate. I barely slept. I just stayed at home, surrounded by the memories of a life I thought I had, trying to understand how I was supposed to go on after something like that. But one thing was absolutely clear. I was definitely finished with both of them. But they weren't finished with me. It would have been one thing if Sophia had simply accepted what she did and accepted the consequences of her actions. But no, she actually had the audacity to come to me after everything that had happened and ask me to still adopt the baby. She wanted me to treat her as if she were a surrogate mother. She wanted me to act as if the past had never happened. She had spent who knows how long meeting my husband on the sly behind my back. And now she wanted me to simply forget the betrayal and welcome her child as if it were some kind of twisted consolation prize for all the suffering they had caused me. I laughed incredulously when she first mentioned it. I thought she was joking, but she was completely serious. He actually stood in front of me with a frustrated expression, saying things like, "You desperately wanted a baby, didn't you? Well, here's your chance to be a mother." As if that were the real issue. As if the point here was simply to get a baby, and not the fact that it was the result of the most painful betrayal of the two people closest to me. I told her flatly that I would not, and she did not take my answer well. Suddenly I became the villain of the piece. Suddenly I was the selfish one. She acted as if I was being cruel by refusing to accept the child that was conceived through the worst betrayal imaginable. She rushed straight off to talk to our parents, probably hoping they would take her side, but to my absolute relief, they rejected her immediately. They told her clearly that she needed to take responsibility for her own actions, that she had made choices, and now she had to face the consequences. They weren't going to protect her or look for excuses for what she had done. That should have been the end of the matter. But no, the situation got even worse because Daniel also decided that he wasn't going to respond appropriately. He was willing to pay child support because, obviously, he was legally obliged to do so, but nothing beyond that. He told Sophia directly that he wasn't going to participate in the child's life, that he didn't want to take on the role of father, that she should manage on her own. I know perfectly well that he is a complete scoundrel. This man ruined our marriage, completely destroyed my trust, got my sister pregnant, and then, when it all fell apart, he simply disengaged as if none of this was important to him. Nothing that happened seemed to matter to him at all. And suddenly Sophia was no longer so sure of herself. She was no longer acting as if she were in complete control of the situation. She was no longer coming to me demanding that I simply accept the baby and pretending to have some kind of moral advantage. No. Now she came crying to me, explaining to me how difficult it would be for her to be a single mother, how she didn't know what to do, how she didn't think she could raise this baby on her own. And I'm not going to lie, I felt a certain satisfaction at that. Does that make me a bad person? Maybe, but frankly I don't care. 4 months I had been drowning in unbearable pain. I had spent years trying to have a baby, breaking my heart over and over again every time a pregnancy test came back negative, and all this time my own sister had been involved with my husband, expecting his child, and now I was supposed to feel sorry for her? No, absolutely not. I wasn't going to comfort her. I wasn't going to make her feel better about the disaster she had created. She had made her own choices, and now she had to face the consequences. She kept trying to get in touch with me after that, but I completely ignored her. I also blocked Daniel's number. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with either of them. For me, that stage was definitely over. But then my mother informed me that Sophia had decided to give her baby up for adoption. And now I don't know how to feel. It's not the baby's fault. I really want to be a mother with, or without Daniel. I have a stable and well-paid job, so I know I'll be able to support the baby financially without any problems. Any suggestions? Update 1. Hello everyone. It's been about 2 months since my original post, and I honestly didn't expect it to get so much attention. I just needed to vent, but reading all your comments and support has really helped me enormously. It has made me feel less alone in all of this, and I can't thank you enough for that. I have some updates to share, but first I want to clarify a few points. Many people asked if I felt any kind of resentment towards Sophia's baby, or if I blame the child for what happened. The answer is definitely no. I have absolutely no grudge against that baby. None of this is that child's fault, and I am perfectly clear about that. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to adopt it. For a brief moment I did seriously consider the possibility, not because I thought it was a good idea, but because Sophia kept insistently pushing me. She made me feel as if I was being heartless by refusing, as if I were wasting my chance to become a mother, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how absolutely crazy the idea was. How could I raise that child without constantly being reminded of what happened? What if every time I looked at the baby, all I could think about was the betrayal I suffered? What if, without meaning to, I ended up developing negative feelings towards the child? That wouldn't be fair to either me or the baby. So I made my final decision. I'm not going to adopt Sophia's son. I feel much calmer now that I've made this decision. Now, on to the rest of the news. Daniel finally removed all his belongings from the house. It took longer than he would have liked, but at least he's gone for good. I have no idea where he is living at the moment, and, frankly, I don't care to know. At first, he continued to try and get in touch, begging me to take him back, saying he had made a terrible mistake and that he still loved me deeply, but I systematically ignored every message until he finally gave up. However, now I have new problems to face. Since Daniel completely disappeared from my life, Sophia has constantly harassed me. She has not stopped pestering me. At first it was just text messages and calls asking if I had heard from Daniel, if I knew where he was, if I could help her locate him. I initially ignored her thinking she would get the message, but she didn't. She started turning up at my door. Every other day, she would ring the bell, knock on the door, stand outside as if I had some obligation to her. Sometimes I would open the door just to tell her clearly to go away. Other times I wouldn't even bother to answer, but she would persist tirelessly. She would just keep begging. On one occasion, she stood there crying her eyes out, saying that she was going to be a single mother and that she didn't know how to cope, that Daniel was abandoning her just like he had abandoned me, that she desperately needed my help. I almost laughed in her face at the irony of the situation. I told her as calmly as I could that she needed to solve her problems for herself, that she had made her own decisions, and now she had to face the consequences. I made it clear to her that our relationship was definitely over. She didn't take it well at all. She shouted at me furiously, claiming that I had no heart, that I was enjoying seeing her suffer, and you know what? Maybe a small part of me does feel a certain satisfaction, not because I want her to suffer, but because she deserves to face the consequences of her actions. This is her problem to solve, not mine. She hasn't stopped turning up unexpectedly at my house, but at this point I simply ignore her completely. I don't open the door. I don't engage in any kind of communication. I've blocked her number, and I'm honestly seriously considering changing the locks in case she has any other ideas. Update 2. Hi all. I know it's only been a week since my last update, but things have taken another unexpected turn, and I just needed to share it. It turns out that Sophia was already in a relationship when she started her affair with my husband. I found out about this through my mother, who casually mentioned it during our conversation as if it were just another piece of family gossip. She told me that Sophia had a boyfriend, or at least someone she was in a relationship with, and that this man apparently had no idea that she was cheating on him with Daniel. I have no idea who this person is because my mother didn't give me his name, but from what she told me, he was not at all happy when he found out about Sophia's pregnancy. He showed up demanding a paternity test. Sophia initially refused outright. She insisted that she knew for sure that the baby was Daniel's and that there was no point in doing any test. But this man would not give in to her request. He continued to press her, arguing that if she really had nothing to hide, she would simply agree to do the test. She finally gave in to his insistence. The test came back negative, confirming that the baby was not his. I can't even begin to imagine how painful that moment must have been for him. Imagine thinking you might become parents, insisting on a paternity test, and then discovering that not only is the baby not yours, but the woman you were dating was cheating on you with her sister's married husband. That's too much betrayal concentrated in one situation. I don't know all the details, but I guess the relationship ended after that, and I sincerely applaud him. He deserves much, much better. Besides, Sophia finally crossed all the lines and I had to take drastic measures. A few days ago, she showed up at my door again. By now, I was completely fed up with her behavior. She had already destroyed my marriage. She had turned my life completely upside down, and she still had the nerve to show up at my house acting as if I owed her something. So I called the police directly. I didn't even give her a warning this time. I just picked up the phone and made the call. When the officers arrived, she tried to present herself as the victim of the situation. She explained that she was only trying to talk to her sister, that she didn't intend to cause any trouble, and that she was desperate and urgently needed my help. But the police didn't accept her excuses. They clearly warned her that she couldn't show up at my house uninvited, and that if she continued with this harassing behavior, there would be serious legal consequences. I think she finally understood the seriousness of the matter because she hasn't shown up again since. For the first time in months, I don't have to listen to his incessant pounding on my door begging me to fix the mess she created. I don't have to put up with his fake tearful story or deal with his attempts to emotionally manipulate me into raising his son. Honestly, this whole situation has been completely surreal from start to finish, but I think I'm finally seeing some light at the end of this long tunnel. Daniel has left for good. Sophia is out of my life, hopefully forever, and I'm finally starting to heal emotionally. Update 3. Hi everyone. It's been almost 7 months since my last update, and honestly I didn't think I'd be writing here again. I thought things had finally settled down, that the chaos was definitely behind me, but as often happens, life had other, completely different plans. A few months ago, Sophia gave birth to a baby girl, my niece. One day she left the little girl at my parents' house, saying she needed to run some urgent errands. My parents, suspecting nothing strange, gladly took care of the baby while they waited patiently for her to return, but she never showed up again. At first they thought that maybe she was just late, maybe she lost track of time, maybe something unexpected came up. But then the hours turned into a full day, and then into 2, and finally into 3. They called her repeatedly without getting an answer. They went to her apartment and found it completely empty. They contacted all her friends, but no one had heard from her. Eventually, they filed an official missing persons report, but deep down I think even they sensed the truth. Sophia wasn't missing, she'd simply run away. She left without looking back. She didn't even have the basic decency to leave a note explaining why. Not a single message, no justification. She just disappeared as if she'd never existed. Who does something like that? I mean, I already knew perfectly well that she was a selfish person. I was already aware of her irresponsibility, but abandoning her newborn baby without a single word, that represents a completely new and incomprehensible level of cruelty. Despite everything that has happened, my parents have bravely taken responsibility. For now they are taking care of the little girl with all their love. They did not hesitate for a second. They simply did what any decent person would have done in those circumstances. I have visited my niece several times since then, and although I am perfectly clear that I do not wish to be her mother, there is something of which I am absolutely sure: I will be the best possible aunt for her. This child deserves much more than the people who brought her into this world. She deserves to be loved unconditionally. Daniel has remained completely absent throughout this process. I'm not even sure if he knows that Sophia has disappeared. If he does know, he clearly doesn't care at all. He made it very clear from the outset that he didn't want to be involved with this baby in any way, and as much as that deeply upsets me, it may be the best thing for the child. The last thing that little girl needs in her life is a father who sees her as an unwanted burden. The only interaction I had with him was when I contacted him to get his current address so I could send him the divorce papers. He signed them without any problem. I did not ask for any financial compensation. The house was already in my name. My parents are sorting out all the legal aspects of the situation. They are in constant communication with a specialized lawyer to determine the appropriate procedures. They have discussed the possibility of formally adopting the child, but I don't know if they have made a final decision on the matter. As for me, I'm just taking one day at a time. I continue to heal emotionally from everything that has happened. I continue to gradually rebuild my life after the disaster that was my marriage, but I find myself in a much better place than I was a year ago. Thank you all for listening to me and accompanying me in this process. Your support has meant so much more to me than I can express in words.